Hi, welcome to Cubs and Culture. I'm not going to get this up today, but it's currently September 13th, 2018. Um, Continuing on with our Best Pictures Cavalcade. One Best Picture in 1933, also won Best Director and Best Art Direction. This was actually one of the hardest ones to get. It's a very obscure film. Very few people have actually seen it. Just for like comparison's sake, it only has 3,000 votes on IMDb. Up until it's one of the most sort of structurally interesting Best Picture winners. I would say it's the first real out and out film that tries to be artistic, not just be entertaining, not just being like a Hollywood product, until Midnight Cowboy. Because this movie reminds me of all things, the movie Boyhood. Okay, so basically it tells this, well, it's not really a story, it's sort of plotless, but it's a series of episodes with an upstairs downstairs British family from 1899 to 1933, and he hits sort of the big beats in British history. So you have like the Boer War as the first episode, and the death of Victoria, the sinking of the Titanic, World War One, etc. And it's sort of plotless, and it's sort of is meandering in its storyline, because it's not really interested in telling a story per se. It's basically talking about the passage of time and how we relate to big moments in history. And so there's that. And on that sense, it's actually kind of a really good film. It's sort of a very interesting film structurally. Ultimately, I really, really like this film. It's quite... it's very pretty to look at. Coy, who was the director, has a very good eye for composition, and the art direction is really good. I think it hasn't aged particularly well. As you can tell, only 61% on Tomato Meter, and 6%, 6 out of 10 on IMDb, because the movie is dealing with nostalgia, and this is probably, excuse me, easiest to tell by the soundtrack, because the soundtrack, it's all popular music. Like 50 really popular songs from that time period, which today we don't we just recognize it as old music. But if you're living in 1933, you'll recognize it as, oh my god, that's that song from 1910, etc. It's very well acted. I think I'm gonna show one scene in the trailer and a couple other stuff to try to get at what I'm to discuss it. It's such an interesting film. Just let me also quickly talk about this. Cavalcade, the word, means a formal possession of people, and it keeps, every time it jumps in time, because it's a 33-year story-ish, like 34-year, whatever. It keeps cutting to these shots of medieval individuals riding along in a cavalcade, which is a procession. And so because of that, it really gives the sense that it's this deeply like the passage of time, the march of history. And then at the end of the movie, I'm going to show a little bit of this. There's this whole thing about because the upstairs family loses both their kids, and then there's this sequence of on New Year's Eve of them basically fretting about the future, and there's a whole stuff about churches being empty and atheists and everything like that. And so the movie feels very deeply conservative Berkeleyan. We're just this deep social tradition. So it's a very unconventional film structurally, but it's very politically and socially conservative, and very, very British. Um, so, like, as a story, I can understand why it could annoy people, because it does have like plot threads just come and go, and sort of like a Doom love affair is like only 3 scenes. In any case, let me bring up some stuff, the trailer, etc. Kind of just droning on here. Let me get back in a moment. Okay, so the trailer doesn't exist, so I'm just going to show some of the credits. And one thing I really do like about this movie is it really does emotionally sort of capture the melancholy and bittersweetness of New Year's. And then also, it is a very strange movie because of the way in which the episodic nature of it is broken up with this medieval cavalcade, which you see behind the credits, and it really seems very Berkeleyan to me. Like it's just this great tradition of humanity that everyone's part of, and that might not really work as a story. And so the first scene I want to show you, see, this is what I mean. The cavalcade is always there. The first thing I want to show you is this love scene with a couple on a honeymoon, and then just to set it up, these are the children of sort of the main upstairs people, and there's one other scene before this where they're adults and they are clearly a couple, and then there's a couple of brief scenes with their kids, but there's not really all that much with them. And so this is sort of their main sort of scene, and it kind of, if you just look at it in terms of a scene, there's an interesting or a believable intimacy between them, and the acting is very, very good. They have a good sort of chemistry with each other. And then if you follow the dialogue, eventually it's all about measuring. Like she'll talk about how big the ocean is, and then counting fish, and then eventually they talk about, you know, how long will you be together? Okay, and so there's that. So there's this notion of measuring, especially measuring time, and then life, death sort of hangs over every single scene and episode of this film. And so because that, it doesn't feel so much like a story, but as sort of a thematic exploration of just like the passage of time. Yet you are watching actors play characters, and there's clearly meant to be sort of a dramatic or theatrical quality here, where I don't know. So I don't know if it fully works as a film because of this tension between it trying to be a story but also trying to be this artistic exploration of passage of time, or what nostalgia, or how we relate to history, however you want to put the point, because you know how they're talking about their children before. And so, any case, the reason why I'm seeing this scene is it's supposed to be this. I really, let me pause here. I really like that line. Well, yeah, my life, shut up. It's such a easy chemistry. It rings very true to me. A couple would have that sort of banter. And it's not very forced, and I really like their performances. But in any case, like I was saying, this scene could feel incredibly forced because in a moment you'll see that they're on the Titanic, so obviously they die and drown at the end, and it's supposed to be sort of a doomed love affair. But this really is the only scene, so as a sort of like a thematical point about how people get swept up in the tides of history or passage of time, however you want to put the point, it sort of works thematically, but at the same time it's very, very mawkish and manipulative and melodramatic as an actual like story beat, but you have not spent a lot of time with these characters. Again, because there's only like 2 scenes, and so there's really this weird sort of tension where it's sort of artistically or thematically it sort of works. and then but it doesn't really work as a story. And then probably the thing stress the story thing is how much it bothers me is I can't tell you what the initiating incident is other than possibly it turning 1900. There's really not that story structure of initiating incident, first act climax, reversal of fortune, climax, etc. And so this is meant to be sort of emotional, but it can come across as campy because it is sort of the Titanic. So if the scene worked for you, and I think it ultimately works for me, I think the movie will work for you. Okay. And because the movie is ultimately sort of about time, and World War One is sort of a huge segment because her two kids, the main character's two kids, one dies on the Titanic and the other one dies in World War One. So you have this sequence, which is the most interesting in the entire film. It's sort of the best. It's just, you know, soldiers marching into World War One is just constantly in the background of this shot, and then you have people dying, and then you have recruiters, which is the singing girls, always being juxtaposed within the passage of 1914, 1915, etc. And this shot is, well, sequence, I guess I should say, is such an interesting way of doing a world war, because it is, so you get sort of the chaos and you get the bombardment, you get the destruction, as you can see the town in the background shot is slowly being destroyed. You get the death, but you also get, you know, a weird sense of time because there's not a cut in the background shot. It's just constantly marching behind them. Okay, which again sort of connects us to our sense of time and how we relate to the passage of history. But then also, because it's a war, you really get a sense of men marching into the meat grinder or marching into the throes of death, and just how many people are dying, because it really seems to be an implication that every single one of them, of the men marching in the background shot, are going to die. And then that's especially true because of the crucifix on the left marching over them. And as the shot goes on, it gets actually brighter and brighter. And so because of that, this is easily the most striking sequence in the film. It's also the most powerful because even if the old film overall doesn't work, this visual metaphor for World War One is really cool and well thought out. Because you get the chaos, you get the meat grinder, you get the death, you get sort of the pointlessness of it, and everything like that. And it's with the crucifix, you get religion. What is God thinking about this? Because again, this movie is sort of percolating about God and country. Well, this shot is all about God and country, because of the crucifix and those all being British soldiers. And then, and then 1914, 1915, it's just the march of the time. So it really works on so many different levels. I can't play the sound, but even like the sound, it's really hard to understand what anyone is saying. So it feels very much like a battle scene, but also like a marching scene. And also just sort of about the passage of time, and it really is a cool setup, and it's a really for 1933 it's a really technically challenging thing because it's just a series of dissolves. Now in the last scene I'm going to show you, because again the movie sort of bookended with New Year's Eve's, is this toast, and it's going to be another sequence of just chaotic visuals, and there's going to be her wishing for peace and unity upon the nation of England, because 1933 was the Depression, and then Red Scare, a whole bunch of other things tearing the nation apart. And then because of that, there's always, again, New Year's nostalgia, the march of time. There's always this sense that the battle, the good days are always behind you. that the future isn't bright. And so that's one of the things this film does really, really well, because she's very sort of pessimistic and he's very sort of optimistic, because he's all about the future and she's all about the past, and they're a husband and wife. And if you follow everything here, like God is a superstition, or we're all broke, it's all sort of tensions that are facing the nation of England at this time. And so what's going to happen? Where is the cavalcade going? And so because of that, even with sort of the, I guess, underwritten or underplotted character motivations or character stuff, because there's a certain plot threads that get dropped in this film, it still ends up being sort of an emotional final couple of minutes, because it really feels like meditation on what happens at New Year's, because she's focused on the past and the present and what's going to happen, and he's all about the future. So that's going to be it for Cavalcade. It's a very interesting film, probably the first art film to win Best Picture, and the only one besides Midnight Cowboy in the the first half of the Oscars. So that's going to be it for Clubs and Culture. Have a good night.